In your words, what is the Matt Knox origin story?
Right. I grew up on a dairy farm and then discovered musical theater and then decided I wanted to go to college for that. I was going to study that, try to be a Broadway performer. And I ended up going to NYU, but applied to the wrong college within the university. And because of that, through a series of weird events, I ended up studying physics and then discovered internet, like programming for the internet. And that was in about 2004. And ever since then, I love software. It's incredible that we can possibly get paid to do this. If it was illegal to do software, I'd be the guy on the corner with a trench coat being like, yo, I got that Ruby. You want some of that Rust? I got that Rust for you. And so I started doing, I've started doing Rails in like 2006. That led me to Twitter, which was I think really changed my career and my life. And since then, I've just derped around in startups, and I've been at Reddit now for 5.5 years or so. It's been a really fun run, and I've gotten to work with amazing people, like several friends of yours, and of course you as well.
I have a question. I have a friend whose husband grew up in a farm, and I feel like people have this idea about farm life that is so different from what it actually is. That it's a lot of waking up early and a lot of work. How was it growing up in a dairy farm?
Super dangerous, really fulfilling, and extraordinarily dirty, right? Like I generally tell people that Americans tend to get hung up on four things: birth, death, dirt, and sex. And like Americans are super squeamish about all those things as a general rule. And growing up on a dairy farm, you just see so much of all those things, right? That you see cows fucking like all the time. And you see, or you see, there was a literal lake of poop, like a lake of cow poop out on the farm. It was the size of like a basketball court, and it was like 10 feet deep. And so there was all these like crazy things like that to me as a child were just normal experiences. Or the fact that like death lurks everywhere on a farm. There'll be, industrial machinery that if you touch it wrong, you'll die. It'll like tear your arm off and you'll die. Or like the most mundane thing, like a sawdust pile. There's a sawdust pile that we would use to bed the cows. And there was a cliff on the sawdust pile because they would pick it up with a loader and it would leave this sharp cliff. And I was told as a kid, you can't play near the sawdust pile because if you do, it can fall down and it can smother you and you can die. So like everything on the farm was like, oh, here's this cool thing that's really fun, but also here's how it can possibly kill you. And yeah, it was like incredibly dirty, incredibly dangerous, but lots of fun.
Do you have strong opinions on any animals from your experience?
I think cows are underrated and geese are mean motherfuckers and horses are super annoying. And I'm glad they get eaten in some places. Horses, like we didn't have horses, but I've dealt with horses a little bit and they're kicky as hell and they tend to bite you. And so I'm not a huge fan. Cows are great in my experience. A couple times they've tried to kill me, of course, like that's just par for the course. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like you hang out with large animals sometime, eventually one of them tries to kill you. And, but yeah, I enjoyed hanging out with cows, especially baby cows. Baby calves are like the cutest little things. They're like all knobby knees. They look like tiny black and white supermodels. Because they're like all knobby knees, like staggering around and looking all coked out. Yeah, but geese, super mean.
Musical theater. How did you find musical theater? What made that something for you to explore?
Grew up really, my family wasn't musical at all, basically. And so when I went to high school, they had a play and I was like, oh, I guess we should go to the play. And it was Godspell, was a hippy dippy 70s version of the Gospels. It was kind of like Jesus Christ Superstar, but a little bit earlier. And I went there and I was like, oh my God, musical theater is the best thing ever. And I want to try it. So I auditioned for the various plays and then served as a stage manager and eventually had a few roles on stage, which was really fun. And then I was just like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is great. And then I applied to college and got to NYU. And then I discovered how good the really good people are. I was like, oh, I can maybe be as good as the people at my school. But then I saw the people who were like for real in at NYU, and I was like, okay, this is not my sport.
Do you remember some of the other schools you applied to? Why NYU? Did you only apply to schools in like a place where you felt like you could pursue that very well, or were you just like anywhere?
I was the worst college applicant basically ever. I applied to three schools. I applied to Cornell because they have a really good musical theater program and also the best agricultural program in the world. And I was like, I don't know, like if I don't make it work in musical theater, probably I'll end up in agriculture because mostly people end up doing what their parents did, like statistically. And so I thought that was probably going to be the thing. But then I also applied to MIT because I don't know, I had pretty good SAT scores and I thought that MIT seemed like a school for really smart kids that I was like, I want to be one of the super smart kids. And then NYU, I applied to because my father was friends with a guy who was a professor there. And so he said, hey, you should totally apply at NYU. And NYU basically bought me. They were like, hey, we'll give you a full scholarship and we'll give you a trip to two trips a year, one domestic and one international. And I was like, this sounds amazing. I'm totally going to go there. So it's like the least thoughtful process. I don't know. I do not know a single other person who is as thoughtless about applying to college as I was.
Different is NYU from where you came from?
Went directly from a dairy farm to Manhattan, so I would say fairly different, right? Like it was, the town I was in was the size of San Francisco and had a population of about 2,000 or 3,000, I guess, something like that. So really small, and I lived in a very desolate part of it, and then I moved directly to Washington Square Park, right in the center of Manhattan, and it was a crazy difference, right? Like I'd seen cities before, but I'd never seen a city that had a really big gay population. And I moved there during Pride Week, and so I was like, I wasn't aware that people like this existed at all. And so it was a super fascinating time. I learned a lot.
One of the questions I ask a lot of people is, what is something you'd like to experience for the first time again? And my answer is coming to America.
Man, so many food things all competing on this. Like the first time you have really good French crepes or anything like that. I think the first time seeing my first child born, that would be like, that's definitely the top, right? Like that. You can never really, there are a bunch of experiences that are sort of, irreducible in the sense that you can't express them in terms of other experiences, right? And I think having I think the biggest one probably is seeing your child for the first time. It's just amazing.
I know couples don't like to admit who won, who the child behaves or looks more like, but who won for the first kid?
I won huge on the first kid, right? Like my wife is relatively shy. This may surprise you, but I'm less shy. And so my daughter's this like really big personality. And, it was, my wife makes fun of me all the time when she'll say, for instance, when my daughter's doing she's taking up a lot of space in the room. And I'm like, Sky, we got to leave. You can't keep talking to these people. My wife will say to me, you did want a kid who was a little force of nature. And I was like, yep, that is true. That is true. And how you want to be as a parent, I think. But for me, I wanted to be really present in the kids' lives. And I wanted to that's why I was walking around wearing a baby carrier full of kids and like one in the front and one on the shoulders and all that. And it was really nice. But it was, as Kevin said, a tremendous amount of energy. I said to a lot of people really early on, I was like, look, I've got two daughters. They're going to have a million people in the world telling them to take up less space in the room or be quieter or don't run so fast and don't do these other things. And so that's fine. I'll be one person at least who tells them that it's okay to take up more space in the room and to be loud and jump around and everything. Although even I, though, sometimes have to be like, all right, look, kids, it's time to brush your teeth. I love that you're doing this game, but you got to brush your teeth now because we got to go to bed so you can wake up in the morning. But yeah, generally I want to let them take up a lot of space.
We're in NYU, we're trying to study musical theater. How did we end up in the engineering or the physics department? How did we end up in physics?
Yeah, so I got there to give you an idea of how dumb I was at the time. When I got this full scholarship, I was like, wow, that's so weird that the best theater school in the world would give me a full scholarship. That's amazing. I was like, oh, I know what happened. They must have scouts that go out and watch high school theater shows to look for the new talent. They must have seen my show where I had the lead role. And they were like, we got to get this guy. I was like, that's got to be it. That's the only explanation. Actually, the reason was I had applied to the College of Arts and Science rather than the College of Arts. I had assumed the Tisch School of the Arts, which has all their theater stuff. I was like, I would assume the arts would have been in the arts and science. So I applied there. And so when I got there, I said, hey, like which theater school? Well, like which of the many theater schools within the College of Arts and within Tisch School of the Arts am I going to? And they said, no, you're in the College of Arts and Science. And I was like, oh, okay. So can I not major in musical theater? And they said, no, that's not for us. And I said, oh, well, I'd like to switch schools to the one that has musical theater. And they said, you can, but then you lose your scholarship and you'd have to wait to apply for like 6 months. So I said, oh, well, shit, what kind of majors do you have? And they said, pre-law, pre-med, pre-dental. There was lots of pre's. And then I was like, I want to do something now, not later. And they said, engineering. Wait, no, you can't do engineering. And I was outraged. I was like, why? Why can't I do engineering? They said, well, you had to have applied as an engineer. Like the admission process is pretty selective. And you have to take this math test. I was like, yeah, put me in the room with the math test and we'll see what happens. It'll be fine. And so just to spite this poor admissions person, I went and took the test and I did fine and I got in. And they let me into the engineering program, which was a dual degree thing. You had one science degree and one engineering degree. So you'd come out with like a double major in math and mechanical engineering or something. And so they said, okay, now you have to pick your majors. And I said, I refuse. They were like, what? You have to take classes. And I said, well, yeah, I'll take the classes, 100% with you on that. They were like, to pick the classes, you have to know what major you're in. I said, no, I'm going to take all the prerequisites for all the majors until I decide that I don't like those majors anymore. And so I ended up taking physics and chemistry and physics, chemistry, math, and computer science for my first year. And then I eventually didn't like biology, so I didn't take any of that. And I dropped chemistry eventually and ended up with just a physics degree.
So at this point, you were taking physics. How was physics in NYU? And how is it going to a school
really distracting,
that is literally
right? Like
in the middle
I was
of a
not
city?
a very focused student. I was trying to do a million things all at once. I was trying to do figure skating and go around and see shows and explore the city and make friends and try to date. Like I'd never really dated that much up until that point, and just trying to do all these things. And the physics department at NYU, I got incredibly lucky. There was this amazing physicist named Alan Sokol, who was an amazing teacher, and he taught a course, special relativity from first principles. So you would take these. It was this amazing honors course, tiny class, like 8 people in it, and he basically started from high school algebra and taught special relativity, and like taught all the intuition for it. It was such an amazing class. So NYU's physics department as a whole was not super strong, but several of the teachers were excellent and I really enjoyed it. But the city was, to me, like the big chunk of my experience at college, right? Like I was just out in New York wandering around like all the time. And New York was such a fascinating city to me. Like I'd never seen anything like it. I'd never lived in a place with buildings higher than 3 stories before. And so this was like really different and incredibly exciting just to meet so many different kinds of people.
How did we go from Matt Knox studying physics to Matt that gets into tech?
Great question. So because I was trying to take courses in everything, there was this course in entrepreneurship. There was this course in entrepreneurship from this business school that non-business students got to take. So I went and tried it. And I really enjoyed the idea of startups which came out of that. And so I made a startup doing biometrics integration, so like fingerprint scanners and things like that in 2000, or sorry, not 2000, in 1999, like right at the end, right as the sort of internet bubble was really coming up. By that point, I had become aware of computers and started programming a little bit. And I was like, oh, I can probably build sort of a middleware that will sit between all the various pieces of biometrics that you're going to want to do to make a secure system for your factory or your warehouse or your this or your that, right? Like all those things. And so I was the worst founder maybe possible, in that there was pretty ample funding at the time. So if you were like a relatively smart kid who could come over and like pitch a good story, you could reasonably raise money. But I was like, nah, man, I'm just going to finance it on my credit card. I'm going to finance my startup on my credit cards. Because then it'll grow a bunch more and we'll take way less dilution, right? And that'll be way better. And then the crash of 2000 happened, and then I folded my company just in time so that like all the trademarks expired and all that kind of stuff by the time 9/11 happened, at which point there was money like pouring into anything security related. So had that startup still been around, it's conceivable I could have raised some money around that. So I was like, there was a narrow window to totally fail in that one, and I totally nailed the window of failure. And then because of that, I was like scrounging around for a job and ended up getting into a company that was doing a company called Direct Revenue, which did adware. So they would like go to somebody who made a screensaver, they buy the screensaver from him, and then they would distribute it for free on the internet along with an ad client. So you would get the screensaver, so it's like some dude washing your like window washer dude washing the window of from the outside of your screen, and you would at the same time you would get an ad client that would like pop ads in your machine. So that was that company hired me as like an analyst to like figure out what was going on with their growth and what was going on with their churn and things like that. And I ended up finding that the thing that was a problem with their growth was that the people who installed their stuff tended to install other nasty software, and so that would cause them to like wipe the system and reinstall Windows. And so they said, hey, you programmed a little bit. Can you write software to get rid of those other people's software? And I said, I totally lied. The answer was no. I didn't know anything about that. But I was like, yes, I can definitely do that. And then I took a couple days and learned C and Windows, like the Win32 APIs, and started getting rid of all the software, like writing C code to get rid of all their software. And that was my first programming job.
From this experience, you had the serendipity of applying to the College of Arts and Science instead of the College of Arts. And you also had the situation where if your startup just had stayed a little bit longer, you'd have been able to get more funding for it. How do you feel about the lottery of life and the happenstance of it all, now that you had an opportunity where it worked in your favor versus one when it worked against your favor?
I think that there's so much random in all of our lives, right? Like you're walking down the street today, you're probably walking by 1,000 people. You're in New York probably, so like thousands of people, and you don't know which of those could be a friend or, a romantic partner or a business partner or whatever. And so being willing to take up being willing to have, in the physics sense, a large interaction cross section. So particles that like to interact with other particles have a large interaction cross section, and particles that don't, like neutrinos, have a very small interaction cross section. I think having a big interaction cross section with the world, leaving yourself very open to possibility and very open to like meeting some person and thinking maybe this person, we're going to be really close, or maybe like we're going to start something together, maybe whether it's like a podcast or a company or like a blog or whatever it is, being willing to have these new experiences with the people and places that you come across in your life, that's served me really well. And sometimes you're going to mess up, right? Like I messed up with IntelliStructure, the biometrics company, But then that's okay because I'm going to get another at bat right after that. And that's in fact what happened.
You've done this software, and this is your first programming job, and you've done this software. How long do you end up staying there before your stint at Twitter, or which other places do you work at before?
I was there for about I was there for about 4 years through various incarnations of the company. And then they started a music social network, so streaming music and music plus social networking. So it was like kind of the high speed collision of MySpace and Pandora from back in the day, which was a streaming music service. I built that. I built that in Ruby on Rails, and then for dumb reasons, I was like, oh, this company isn't going the way I kind of want it to, so I'm going to leave. Then I bounced out. I went to a social network in Boston called Sermo, and then I moved out to San Francisco to follow an ex-girlfriend, and applied to a bunch of companies and got a job at Twitter. And that was like a crazy life-changing experience.
Why do you say it was a crazy life-changing experience?
Well, I had gotten really interested in sort of internet technology generally, right? And specifically, I was interested in Ruby on Rails because in 2006, when I started doing it, that was like a new, really hot thing, and people were building all sorts of crazy new stuff with it. And that was great. So I was going and seeing I would go to these conferences and see all these people. And I was like, man, the people attending this conference know a lot more than me. And then the speakers, they were like aliens from another planet with all this amazing knowledge that I just didn't have. And then, and I felt that they were qualitatively different from me, that I was not like, clearly they just know way more than me. And that's amazing. But then when I went to Twitter, the table of people that I sat with my first day, every person at the table could have been a speaker at one of those conferences. And I had this crazy, like, how am I working with all these amazing geniuses? It's insane that would be the case. But I was like, I guess I'll just learn from them. And I did. It was amazing. Nick Callan, who is this big Pivotal Labs guy, who was a big Rubyist and then a Scala person, an amazing programmer and a brilliant person and an incredibly kind human being, really taught me an amazing amount of things, right? Like how test-driven development works and how to do Ruby in really good ways and how you do large network services and how to debug things like what is strace anyway, and like all these things. And so Twitter was just this incredible learning experience for 5 years for me. And that really changed it changed my work life enormously, but it also changed a lot about how I see the world, right? Because I was able to see from the inside how this big, important company that was all over the news, I was able to see how that worked from the inside. And it made me aware of how incomplete people's picture of the large companies that they see on the news is, right? Like people think they understand what's going on inside Goldman Sachs or Twitter or Facebook or anything like that. But having actually been inside, you get a very different picture, which was incredibly interesting.
Twitter, while you were there from the beginning to the end, how much did Twitter scale? Like, what showed you? Was there a moment in your time at Twitter you're like, oh my God, I'm actually in the company in the news, or that people are talking about, or people do not like my company? When was that moment that made you realize you're working at Twitter, like all caps Twitter?
It was the first time we had famous people coming in to visit. Like, so there, like celebrities would just like drop by randomly, and it was really weird. There was this. I think the first person that came in was Malika Sherawat, who's a Bollywood actress. She came and she apparently just like was coming through San Francisco for whatever reason, like doing some Hollywood thing. And just came and dropped by the office and visited and like came in and gave a speech to the company. And many of us had no idea who she was, but she was like this actress looking woman. So I was like, that's weird that these actress people are coming in. Or when Arnold Schwarzenegger came through the office, and that was like literal Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I turned and I was going to yell, "Get down!" and like dive for the floor, but he had these two really scary looking bodyguards, and I was like, okay, maybe not. So it's like all these celebrities visiting, but then just seeing it everywhere, right? Like seeing people talking about the thing you're working on. That was a completely new experience to me. I mean, I grew up farming, and nobody's like talking about the milk they've got, right? Like nobody's, even though it's so vital, it's like the food that sustains them, but nobody thinks about it. Nobody talks about it, but people do talk about the Twitter at the time in 2009 through 2014. People were talking about it all the time. It was on the news all the time. And people that I ran into on the street would talk to me and would like remark on the fact that I was wearing whatever, a Twitter shirt or something, and would ask me if I worked there. And I would, when I said yes, they would say like, "Oh yeah, I learned this amazing thing," or "I met my wife on Twitter," or whatever it was. Like so these incredible interactions with everybody.
Every time that Twitter was down and one of your friends was like, "Go fix your site."
It happened all the time. 100%. Like I was and many times it was me, right? Like I got to be the engineer on call. So I was like so Twitter had at the time and one engineer on call who was like responsible for the entire site. With the exception of search, which had its own on call. But so the site would go down and we would like, okay, let's figure out what's going on. And like the reasons the site would go down were just so bonkers. There was a porn star once that took Twitter down because she had, this is literally true. Her name is Lacey Duval. And so Lacey Duval had a protected Twitter account with like, so it was private. You couldn't follow it, but you could ask to follow it. You could say with a private Twitter account, you can go and ask to follow it. So she had a private Twitter account and hundreds of thousands of people who had follow requested her, right? They'd go on Twitter, they'd see her Twitter account somewhere on one of her videos or something maybe, and they'd go request to follow her. And so she had these hundreds of thousands of follow requests. And then there was a button that on Twitter, when you were a protected account, that said, "I'm going to let these 3 people follow me out of this list." But there was also a convenience button, which was accept all of your followers, all of them, all at once. And the person who wrote that button didn't bother putting a limit clause in the query to the number of users it was going to follow. So for her, and only her, that button would then fetch everybody, right? Or actually, so the button would work like that for everybody, but she had hundreds of thousands of followers. And those hundreds of thousands of followers, when they got pulled into memory from the database, were big enough that it would run over the memory limit for the Rails app, and the server would get killed. So she, and basically only she, had a button that was kill one server on Reddit, or on Twitter rather. So she, one of the days that I was on call, she went out and clicked the accept all followers and then waited patiently for 3 seconds and hit it again. And then just went to town with what I can only describe as porn trained fingers of just like that. And she took down like 10% of Twitter's server fleet at the time. And the site had a brownout. It was like it was working-ish, but not really. It was like 1.9 of reliability at the time or something. So it was so I had all these crazy incidents that were in a way really heartening, in that I was like, wow, the whole world is relying on us to be up, and we're messing up. We got to make it better.
At this point, you are at Twitter and you are ready to make the move to Reddit, right?
No, I actually left Twitter to go to a tiny startup called Secretly, which was my only proper Silicon Valley shit show, right? Like I joined the company on November 1st, and I think I left. I quit around the time my first daughter was born in March of 2015. So I was there for 4 or 5 months or something like that. And the company basically imploded a month or two after that. So it was, that was the only company that I was at that was actually like super chaotic and all sorts of weird stuff was going on inside. A fascinating story. But so that I went to that, and then I just took some time to be a dad for my first daughter. And then then after that, I went to a company called Fin, which was building an artificial intelligent digital assistant. So it was building like an M-Turked, like a mechanical Turked AI assistant. So you talked to it like it was a chatbot, but on the other end was actually people. And the idea was that the idea was brilliant in a lot of ways. It was that people really want that chatbot interface, right? They want to be able to talk to the interface like Her from the movie Her, and have it do everything, right? Like it can send emails for you, it can schedule a restaurant reservation, it can buy flights for you, anything you want. And people want that so much that they'll pay an enormous amount for it. And you'll be able to hire people to do it. And it'll be kind of a cool job for them in a lot of ways because they'll have all these weird, interesting requests. And eventually we'll sort of replace pieces of that with AI. And then the whole thing will be amazing. So I joined that company. I was there for about 2-ish years. Ultimately, I left around the time my second daughter was born, which was 2017. And then I just sort of hung around being a dad for a bit. And then I ran into Steve, the Reddit founder CEO, in the mission, and he asked me to come talk to Phil Aquilina, who is a friend of both of ours, who was at the time a relatively new engineering manager at Reddit. And so I went to Reddit, and when I got there, I was like, "What, man? Twitter and Reddit are so similar. This is like I totally recognize this whole situation." So I joined Reddit, and I've been there ever since. So that's been 5.5 years now.
One of your toughest on-call rotations versus two of your daughters sick, wife is sick. Which poison are you picking in that scale? Or which one do you think you'd handle easier?
I handle the kids and wife sick easier for sure. And the on-calls were also more fun because like when you fix the on-call, it's fixed, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like or a particular bug, when I found the Lacey Duval bug, I was like, oh, okay, this is a super easy bug. It's going to take me 15 minutes. I'm going to fix it. And this particular problem is never happening again. And by contrast, when your kid's sick, first of all, it's way scarier. Like one time Skyla, my elder daughter, got a really bad fever and she had a seizure in bed. And she was laying next to me and just turned stiff as a board and was like shaking. And I didn't know if she was going to die. That was incredibly more scary. But in general, I would rather the site be down than my kids be sick, but I want to be there more for my kids being sick. Do you know what I mean? I really want to, when my kids are sick, I really want to be there. And while it's hard, it's also a lot of times you can make the kids laugh and stuff like that. So I don't know. So I think the on-call is easier and in some ways more fun, but I want to be there for the kids. So it's a tough split for me.
I have a couple of questions. I think it's all wrapped up in one question. I think something we talked about earlier was how the world was changing so much around us and so quickly. If you were to be entering tech today, like my sister, she's in college right now, and the landscape when I was applying to jobs and when she applies is so different. If there's a young, ambitious person, and not just ambitious in career, but like you have literally, like I said, I want little daughters running around breaking the things that I own and I'm not being upset at because I yell at them. What would you tell somebody who wants a great career and a great life, very ambitious, to do for themselves in today's climate? Yeah.
Question. I think the sort of generic advice that I would give is to find something that you really, really enjoy, because you're going to be doing this for half of your waking hours for, probably 30, 40 years of your life. For me, programming is that. But if that's not the thing for you, if your thing is like you really love food industry stuff, then great, do the food industry stuff. Find the thing where you're like, you can't imagine wanting to do anything else. And then once you find sort of that area, if that area if you're interested in tech the way I am, I can give more specific stuff about that. Today, man, AI stuff seems like it's just it's like a crazy world changing thing. It feels maybe bigger than early internet stuff did for me, right? In that this is, I think, going to change so many things in the world. Like some will be good, some will be bad. I think on balance, it's going to end up being an amazingly good thing. I think that whenever you're in a thing that makes as much change as this, there's almost always a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think that being willing to just put a thing out in the world in situations like this is generally a really powerful thing, right? People are going to be, for the next 5 to 10 years at least, people are going to be running around and whacking everything with this new hammer, with this relatively new hammer of, ML in general, but large language models specifically. And we're going to find that it's going to be great for some stuff and terrible for some other stuff. And there's so many things to try this on, so many things to try to sort of tap with that hammer to see how it works, that there's opportunities for millions at least of people to be the one that tries to say, like, oh, can we use a language model to sort of understand what baby babble is telling us, or something like that, right? To pick an example close to my own life. And I think that would be, I would look around for things that I found interesting. And I think it's impossible to not look at the machine learning stuff, the modern machine learning stuff, and think that that's just the most fascinating thing that you've seen maybe in your whole life. So that would be, I guess, my advice.
And for all the lonely tech people who are trying to start a family or find a spouse, what advice would you give them? Love advice from Matt Knox.
I don't know, man. My story to finding a partner was pretty weird. I think that here too, I think that relationships end up being, in a weird way, kind of a numbers game, in the sense that you have to meet a lot of people and interact and find out how things work, right? And you never know when those people are going, like, some of those people will come into your life and leave, and you never know when they're going to come back, right? Like, I hadn't talked to you for a year at least before you reached out to me about this. Quite a bit more than a year. I think you're right. Yeah. So, like, and people, as you said, come in and out of our lives, and you've got to remain sort of open to the possibilities, both in sort of a professional sense, but also in a friendship and romance sense, right? And I think that's generally certainly served me really well. I have a beautiful wife and 2 amazing children, and who make all the art behind me. So yeah, that's worked out really well for me, and I imagine it would work out for a lot of people.
Do you think your daughters are going to become like software engineers?
It's really hard to say. They both say that they want to work at my wife's purse company, Arden Cove, which makes theft-resistant, waterproof travel purses. Yeah. And so they want to work at that. Yeah, I'm probably going to lose because my daughter rolled up to first grade or second grade. I guess she rolled up to second grade wearing one of my wife's travel purses, and she was like the cool kid in school for a day. So yeah, I may lose on that one, but you never know, right? Like I just tried to show them what stuff's out there, and hopefully they'll find something they love the way I love coding.
Thank you so much, Matt. And if anybody wanted to find you or reach out to you for certain opportunities, where could they find you on the internet?
Matt Knox, basically everywhere. I'm Matt Knox. MattKnox.com is my website. Matt Knox on Twitter and Reddit and Facebook and Instagram. I think I'm not Matt Knox on TikTok because I came a little too late to that one, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on basically all the things. And I love talking to new people. So I'm usually a pretty easy introduction to get.